For years, the scientific community dismissed the song of comets as beautiful but meaningless noise. They were wrong. A disgraced astrophysicist, risking her freedom to steal the raw data, found the truth hidden within its complex patterns. It wasn't a greeting from the stars. It was an archive of ancient catastrophes, a mathematical key that unlocks a date in our future. What do you do when you discover the universe isn't singing to you? It's sending a countdown. The image on the laptop screen is a ghost from 7 years ago. The video quality is poor, a compressed file from a university archive, but the memory it holds is painfully sharp. A younger Dr. Evelyn Reed stands at a podium, her face alight with a passion she can barely remember feeling. She is vibrant, her hands gesturing with sharp, energetic movements as she makes her case. We are trained to interpret the universe through light, her younger self argues, her voice ringing with conviction. But what if that is a fundamental limitation? The oscillations detected in cometary magnetospheres, the so-called songs of celestial bodies, are dismissed as mere plasma wave interactions. Noise. But the data shows periodicity. It shows structure. I propose we consider a new paradigm, acoustic panspermia. Not the transmission of life, but the transmission of information encoded in the very fabric of magnetic fields, carried across interstellar space for eons. The camera pans briefly across the audience. It is a sea of grey hair and tweed jackets. They are not inspired, they are annoyed. They shift in their seats, murmur to one another. One man, already a titan in the field, Dr. Klaus Richter, doesn't bother to hide his contempt. He leans back, a condescending smirk playing on his lips as he shakes his head in a slow, theatrical motion of dismissal. The image freezes on his face, a perfect, preserved effigy of institutional arrogance. The real Evelyn Reed, 7 years older, a universe away from the woman on the screen, lets out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Her apartment is a chaotic nest of obsession, a testament to a life derailed. Stacks of books on information theory, quantum mechanics, and astrophysics lean at precarious angles, threatening to avalanche onto half-empty coffee mugs and printouts of star charts covered in frantic red ink. This tiny room is her entire world now, a self-imposed exile from the scientific community that had once been her home. She sits in the faint, cool glow of 3 monitors. The one on the left still holds the paused image of Richter's sneering face. The one on the right displays the official webpage for the European Space Observation Network, ESON. A slickly produced article praises the Rosetta mission's recent data release, celebrating the confirmation of the Comet Song. The text is a masterpiece of scientific platitude, describing the phenomenon as a beautifully complex but entirely natural interaction between the solar wind and the comet's plasma environment. Evelyn mouths the words with bitter resentment. Beautifully complex but entirely natural. A gentle pat on the head to the universe for creating such a delightful little puzzle, now solved and filed away. But it is the center monitor that holds her faith. It displays a custom-built software interface, a labyrinth of code and algorithms that represents her life's work since the disastrous lecture. It is a quantum decryption model, designed for one purpose: to prove that the Comet Song is not noise, to prove that it is a signal, a message. A theory so radical it had her laughed out of conference halls and quietly blacklisted from receiving any meaningful research grants. A belief that, in the lonely hours of the night, feels dangerously close to superstition. She sips her cold coffee, the liquid as bitter as her thoughts, and glares at Richter's face. She didn't need grants. She didn't need his approval. All she needed was the real data, the raw, unfiltered terabytes of it that ESON kept locked away behind impenetrable firewalls. A quiet chime cuts through the silence. On her center screen, a small encrypted chat window materializes. The username is a handle she hasn't seen in over a year, Kepler22b. Her heart gives a painful thud against her ribs. This was her contact, a disillusioned junior analyst deep inside ESON, a true believer who risked his career with every whispered communication. Her hands tremble slightly as she types in her password. The message that appears is brutally simple, each word a hammer blow of opportunity and terror. Sub-level server maintenance 0300 0500 CET. Port 7 will be unmonitored. It's your only window, don't miss it. Burn after reading. Evelyn stares, her breath caught in her throat. The words seem to pulse with the light of the screen. For years she had been locked outside, forced to work with the processed, curated, and ultimately useless public-facing data. This was the key, a 2-hour window to bypass the gatekeepers, to slip past the sentinels of orthodoxy and steal the sacred texts. Her mind races, calculating server loads, transfer speeds, the immense risk. This wasn't just breaking the rules of professional conduct. This was a crime, an act that would not just end her career, but could very well land her in prison. Yet the alternative was to let the truth remain buried, to let Richter's smug dismissal be the final word. Her hand moves the cursor, her decision made in the space of a single, frantic heartbeat. She drags the message to a small icon on her desktop, shaped like an incinerator. The message vanishes in a silent puff of digital flame, leaving no trace. There was no going back. The next morning, the weight of her decision presses down on her. She needs an anchor, a voice of reason, even if it's one she intends to ignore. She makes the call. The face that appears on her screen is Dr. Alistair Croft, her former mentor, a man whose kindness was as legendary as his intellect. He sits in a cozy, wood-paneled study, a warm haven of order and tradition that is the polar opposite of her own chaotic bunker. "Evie," he says, his smile warm. "It's been too long. How are you holding up?" "I'm fine, Alistair, working on something." She keeps her voice level, forcing a casualness she doesn't feel. "I had a hypothetical question for you, a thought experiment." Alistair leans forward, his eyes sharp. He knows her too well. "Go on." "Hypothetically," she begins, choosing her words with care. "If a researcher had a theory that contradicted the established consensus, and the only way to prove it was to access data that was being gatekept, would the pursuit of that truth justify unconventional methods of acquisition?" Alistair's smile fades. He knows exactly what she is asking. He lets out a long, slow sigh, the sound of a man who has had this conversation with a dozen brilliant, reckless students over 50 years. "The pursuit of truth," he says gently, but with an edge of steel, "does not justify the abandonment of principle. The moment we decide the rules don't apply to us because our ideas are more important, we stop being scientists and start being zealots." He looks at her, his expression full of a deep paternal concern. "I know what you're thinking, Evie. I know who you're fighting. But Richter plays for keeps. He would use something like this to not just discredit you, but to destroy you, to erase you. Please, don't give him the shovel." Dr. Klaus Richter, director of the European Space Observation Network, stood at the podium, a picture of calm authority. He was a man accustomed to power, and he wore it as comfortably as his impeccably tailored suit. The press room was filled with journalists, their cameras flashing, but Richter commanded the space with an easy confidence, his silver hair catching the light. He had just finished presenting a minor but media-friendly new finding from the vast Rosetta mission archive. Now, during the Q&A, a young journalist posed the inevitable question. "Dr. Richter, your team has done incredible work analyzing the plasma wave oscillations from Comet 67P. But there are still some, like the disgraced Dr. Reed, who cling to fringe theories about these songs. What is ESON's final word on the matter?" A disarming smile spread across Richter's lips, the same condescending expression Evelyn knew so well. He chuckled softly, a sound designed to share a joke with the entire room at the expense of an unnamed heretic. "Ah, yes, the romance of the stars. It's a powerful thing," he began, his tone smooth as polished glass. "It's tempting when we hear something so strange, so otherworldly, to imagine a guiding intelligence behind it, a message in a bottle from some distant shore. He paused, letting the poetic image hang in the air before gracefully dismantling it. But our work, the hard, unromantic work of science, has shown us the truth. We have modeled the interactions down to the quantum level. The comet's dual-lobed shape, its shifting magnetic field, the constant powerful breath of the solar wind. These are the instruments of a celestial orchestra. We are confident, he said, his smile tightening with absolute certainty, that these songs are a beautiful, but entirely natural, magnetic phenomenon. Any suggestion otherwise, however romantic, belongs in the realm of fiction, not astrophysics. The press dutifully scribbled in their notebooks. The case was closed. The official story was written in stone. Miles away, in the suffocating silence of her apartment, Evelyn Reed watched the clock. It was 02:59 CET. Alistair's words echoed in her mind. Zealot. Don't give him the shovel. But Richter's smug, televised performance had burned away her last reservations. He wasn't just a scientist with a different opinion. He was a gatekeeper, a priest of a cold dogma, and he was wrong. She knew it in her bones. Her screen was a triptych of her crime. On the left, the encrypted chat window with Kepler 22b lay dormant. In the middle, her custom hacking software pulsed, a coiled snake of code waiting for a single command. On the right, a digital clock displayed the time in glowing red numerals. The second hand swept upwards, a silent, merciless blade. Each tick was a lifetime. 57, 58, 59. The clock struck 03. Ho! She took a sharp, ragged breath and hit the enter key. The program executed. There was no turning back now. Lines of code, elegant and lethal, cascaded down the screen. A digital schematic of the ESON network bloomed into view, a complex web of servers and firewalls. A single blinking red dot appeared, marking her intrusion point. Port 7. A new progress bar materialized, its text a prayer and a blasphemy all at once. Accessing archive, 67p CG. Inside the ESON data center in Darmstadt, Germany, the air was cold and smelled of ozone and recycled air. Rows of monolithic server towers hummed with a constant low-level thrum, their blinking green lights reflecting on the polished floor. In this technological cathedral, a young, nervous-looking data analyst named Ben Carter sat at his terminal, pretending to run a routine diagnostic. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. On his screen, hidden beneath a meaningless system check window, a data flow monitor showed something no one was ever supposed to see. A massive, unauthorized data transfer bleeding out of the deep archive from an obscure maintenance port. Port 7. He could hear footsteps down the hall. A supervisor on his nightly rounds. Ben's hands felt slick on the keyboard. He quickly maximized the diagnostic program he'd prepared, a meaningless swirl of pie charts and scrolling text that looked official. It filled the screen, covering the evidence of his treason. The footsteps grew louder, paused outside the server room door, and then, mercifully, moved on. Ben let out a shaky breath, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. He was no astrophysicist. He was just a kid who had read Dr. Reed's original paper online and believed her. And now, his belief was making him an accomplice in one of the biggest data heists in the history of science. Back in her apartment, Evelyn was locked in a state of suspended animation. The only things moving in the room were the cursor on her screen and her own frantic pulse. The download was happening. Raw, unfiltered, glorious data was flowing from ESON's Holy of Holies directly to her hard drive. But it was agonizingly, terrifyingly slow. The dataset was colossal, a beast of pure information. A progress bar inched across the screen at a glacial pace, 15%, 23%. She watched the clock on the wall, its ticking now a countdown to her own destruction. The maintenance window was only 2 hours. 2 hours to steal a universe. She chewed on her thumbnail, her eyes darting between the download percentage and the time. 45%, 62%, 1 hour gone. Her system was straining, the fans in her computer whining like jet engines. 85%, 92%. She was getting close, too close. A frantic alert chimed from the encrypted chat window. It was Ben. Low-level security sweep in 5 mins. They're early. Panic, cold, and absolute seized her. 5 minutes. The download stood at 96%. Her screen showed an estimated 3 minutes remaining. It was a race she couldn't possibly win. The progress bar crawled to 98%. Then 99%. The final few megabytes, the last fragments of her stolen truth, felt like an eternity. The clock on her wall showed 4 minutes had passed. Any second now, a silent alarm would trip in Darmstadt. Any second now, they would see her. The bar flashed. The words a supernova on her screen. Download complete. In the same instant, a new message from Ben appeared, stark and final. Pull out now! She didn't hesitate. She slammed her hand down on the keyboard, severing the connection. She ripped the Ethernet cable from the wall, a violent, physical act of disconnection. Then she yanked the main power cord from her server stack. The jet engine whine of the fans died. The 3 monitors went black. The sudden, profound silence was more deafening than the noise. She was alone in the dark, her heart hammering against her ribs. The ghost of the screen's glow still burned onto her retinas. It was done. She had it. She had the truth. And she was a fugitive. Days bled into one another in a blur of caffeine and code. The initial heart-pounding adrenaline of the heist had long since evaporated, leaving behind a residue of gnawing paranoia and bone-deep exhaustion. Evelyn's apartment, once a nest of organized obsession, had descended into pure chaos. Greasy takeout containers formed towers on top of academic journals, and a fine layer of dust was settling on everything, disturbed only by her own frantic movements between the humming server stack and the coffee maker. She looked like a ghost, her skin pale and translucent in the glow of the monitor, dark circles carved under her eyes. For 72 sleepless hours, she had fed the stolen data, her holy grail, into her quantum model. She had processed it, filtered it, run it through every decryption algorithm she had ever designed, and the result was always the same. Nothing. The screen displayed a chaotic, meaningless wall of digital snow. A frantic, angry hiss of static filled her headphones. There were no patterns, no structure, no hidden message. It was exactly what Klaus Richter and the entire scientific community had always said it was. A beautiful, complex, and entirely natural magnetic phenomenon. It was just noise, a wave of despair so profound it was physically sickening washed over her. She had risked everything. Her freedom, Ben's freedom. She had betrayed the principles of her profession, committed a felony, and for what? To prove that her life's work, the one belief that had sustained her through years of ridicule and isolation, was a complete and utter delusion. She slammed her fist on the desk, the impact rattling a pyramid of empty coffee mugs. A single, choked sob escaped her lips. He was right, she whispered to the empty room, the words tasting like ash. Alistair was right. It's nothing. Just noise. For a full day, she didn't touch the computer. She slept, a dead, dreamless sleep, and awoke to the same crushing emptiness. The thrill of the chase was gone, replaced by the bitter reality of her failure. She moved through the apartment like a zombie, tidying aimlessly, the silence of the inert machines a constant accusation. As she was clearing a space on a cluttered bookshelf, her hand brushed against the corner of a heavy, leather-bound trunk, a time capsule from her old life, the one before the disgrace. On a whim, driven by some half-formed desire to see who she used to be, she opened it. Inside, nestled amongst old photographs and academic awards, was her doctoral dissertation. The leather was dusty, the gold leaf title faded. It was the document that had started it all, the work that had branded her a heretic. She lifted it out, its weight familiar in her hands, and let it fall open. Her eyes scanned the table of contents, and then they stopped. Chapter 4. Non-linear resonance filters in complex magnetic fields. The memory hit her like a lightning strike. It was the most theoretical part of her thesis, a purely mathematical model she had developed to describe how a coherent signal could theoretically be extracted from a chaotic plasma environment. It was the part of her work that Klaus Richter had personally attacked during her defense, calling it an unprovable fantasy and a solution in search of a problem. The academic committee had pressured her to remove it. She had refused. It was this chapter, more than anything else, that had poisoned her reputation from the very start. A spark flickered in the fog of her despair. Her current model was designed to find a pattern in the existing signal. But what if the signal wasn't just hidden? What if it was actively, intelligently, masked? What if it required a specific key, a specific filter to make it resolve? She looked from the dusty pages of her past to the silent, dark computer screen. It was a long shot, a desperate, insane gamble, but it was the only one she had left. She scrambled back to her chair, the dissertation falling open beside the keyboard, and her fingers began to fly, frantically coding, integrating the forgotten, ridiculed mathematics of her own past into the heart of her decryption model. She finished as night fell, her body thrumming with a nervous energy she hadn't felt since the heist. She took a deep breath, her hand hovering over the enter key. This was it, the last throw of the dice. She ran the program. For a long, agonizing moment, the screen showed the same chaotic wall of static. Her heart sank. It hadn't worked. It was over. But then something shifted. A single line of code flashed on the screen. Non-linear resonance filter engaged. And the universe opened up. The chaos on the screen did not just stop. It resolved. It was like watching a billion scattered iron filings snap into formation around an invisible magnet. Random, jagged waveforms smoothed out, coalescing into a single, stunningly complex and breathtakingly beautiful pattern. It was not random. It was symmetrical. It was structured. It pulsed on the screen with a slow, deliberate, and undeniably intelligent rhythm. It was a wave, but it was also a diagram. It was sound, but it was also architecture. Evelyn's jaw hung open. She leaned closer, her face bathed in the electric cyan glow of the signal. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling unheeded down her cheeks as she stared at the impossible, glorious truth. A truth she had chased for years. A truth the entire world had denied. A truth now pulsing with life on her screen. She lifted her headphones, and instead of a hiss, she heard a sound. A low, resonant hum, layered with intricate, cascading tones. It was the sound of the pattern, the sound of the message. Her hand flew to her mouth to stifle a sob of pure, transcendent joy. She whispered the words that would change the world, her voice trembling with awe. It's not noise, it's a language. In a sterile, brightly lit security office at ESON headquarters, Dr. Klaus Richter stared at a data flow chart with an expression of cold fury. The on-duty security analyst pointed a trembling finger at a massive, undeniable spike on the chart. It happened during the scheduled maintenance window 3 days ago, the analyst reported, his voice tight with anxiety. The transfer was masked by the diagnostic subroutine, so the automated alarms didn't trigger. But the volume is undeniable. How much? Richter's voice was dangerously quiet. Over 2 terabytes, sir, from the 67p deep archive. Richter's eyes narrowed into slits. 2 terabytes. It was the entire raw data set. An infinitesimal number of people in the world would even know what to do with that data, let alone have the motive to steal it. A name, unspoken for years, surfaced in his mind. A ghost he thought he had long since exorcised from the halls of science. The condescending smile was gone, replaced by the grim certainty of a predator picking up a familiar scent. His authority had been challenged. His narrative had been threatened. This was no longer a matter of academic disagreement. It was an insurrection. He turned to the head of his security team. His voice was calm, but laced with ice. Find who it was. Find them now. Triumph was a fleeting luxury. The transcendent joy of discovery was immediately replaced by the cold, frantic urgency of the hunted. Evelyn worked with a feverish intensity. The exhaustion and despair of the previous days burned away by adrenaline and purpose. The signal, the beautiful, structured language she had uncovered, was now flowing through her decryption model, and it was beginning to talk, but it wasn't speaking in words. There were no greetings, no philosophical treatises, no schematics for faster-than-light travel. The message was pure, unadulterated mathematics. A long, elegant, impossibly complex sequence of prime numbers, geometric constants, and fractal equations unfolded across her screen. It was a language far more universal than any spoken tongue, the base code of the cosmos itself. It was elegant, profound, and utterly baffling. A chime from her encrypted chat window shattered her concentration. It was Ben. His message was a string of panicked text. They found the breach. They're doing a full network audit, tracing the server pings. They're good, Evie. It's only a matter of hours before they pinpoint the download location. Hours. What have you got? Is it anything? Evelyn's fingers flew across the keyboard, her mind racing to translate the profound discovery into a simple, urgent message. It's not a greeting, she typed. It's not words. It's numbers. A map. I think it's a map. Ben Carter knew the risks, but knowing the risks and hearing them kicking down your door are two very different things. From his small apartment in Darmstadt, he was frantically wiping his hard drives, running military-grade erasure programs to turn every byte of his treasonous correspondence into meaningless zeros. He could hear them in the hallway now. Heavy, booted footsteps, voices speaking with calm, professional authority. They were ESON Security, Richter's private army. He looked at his monitor, where the chat with Evelyn was still open. He had one last chance, one final sliver of time to give her something useful. His mind raced over the mathematical sequence she had sent him a fragment of. The constants, the primes. They weren't just a map. They were variables in an equation that solved for time. He typed as fast as his trembling fingers would allow. "They're here," he wrote. Then he heard the splintering crack of his door frame giving way. He had seconds left. He added the final crucial clue. It's a key. The numbers are a key to a date. He slammed his hand down on the enter key, sending the message. In the same motion, he initiated the final system wipe, a command that would melt down his entire hard drive. The door to his apartment burst open, splintering off its hinges. Tactical security officers in dark uniforms poured into the room, weapons raised. Ben didn't even look up. He just watched the progress bar of the system wipe flash across his screen. A final silent act of defiance before the world went black. Evelyn stared at the screen, Ben's last two messages burning in her mind. "They're here." And then the cryptic clue. "It's a key. The numbers are a key to a date." Ben was gone, captured. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. The grief and fear were a physical blow, but she forced them down. Ben had sacrificed himself to give her that last clue. She couldn't let it be for nothing. A key to a date. She looked at the stream of numbers on her main screen. She launched a new piece of software, a sophisticated astronomical package used for charting celestial events across millennia. It was a long shot, but it was the only interpretation of Ben's clue that made sense. She copied the entire mathematical sequence from her model, the prime numbers, the value for pi carried out to 1,000 decimal places, the strange, repeating fractal constants, and pasted it into the software's temporal search function. She was asking the program to find a point in time that matched the mathematical properties of the signal. She hit enter. The computer processed the request. For a long minute, nothing happened. And then, a result appeared. A single precise date. 2627 BC. Evelyn frowned. The number meant nothing to her. She opened a new window, typing the date into a search engine. The results came back instantly. Her blood ran cold. The date, within the margin of error for geologic dating, corresponded perfectly with the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event, the Chicxulub impactor, the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs and 75% of all life on Earth. Her gaze drifted back to the signal pulsing on her other monitor. This wasn't a map. It wasn't a language of greeting. It was an archive, a tombstone. The comets were a vast interstellar warning system, carrying the echoes of ancient catastrophes. A new, more terrifying thought struck her. A logical leap born of pure dread. If the sequence could pinpoint a date in the deep past, could it also identify one in the future? Her hands trembled as she turned back to the astronomical software. She changed the search parameters, telling the program to stop looking backward and to extrapolate the mathematical pattern forward in time, to search for a future date where the celestial mechanics would once again align with the properties of the signal. She executed the search. The computer hummed, the processors whining under the strain of the calculation. The seconds stretched into an eternity. She held her breath, praying she was wrong, praying for the screen to remain blank, but it did not. A new date appeared. A celestial alignment, a threat vector. It was not 66 million years away. It was 18 months from now. Evelyn stared at the screen, the numbers seeming to sear themselves into her brain. The true horrifying purpose of the message was finally, sickeningly clear. This wasn't a historical record. It wasn't a warning. It was a countdown. The knowledge was a fire in her mind, a terrible and glorious burden. But to the rest of the world, she was no prophet. She was a criminal. She saw it on a news broadcast, playing on a television in an electronics store window. There was Klaus Richter, his face a mask of grave concern, his voice dripping with condescending pity. He wasn't addressing a scientific body. He was speaking directly to the public, poisoning the well with chilling precision. ESON has confirmed a malicious data breach by a disgraced former academic, Dr. Evelyn Reed, Richter said, his tone somber. Let me be clear to everyone watching. This is not a search for truth. This is academic terrorism. Ms. Reed, who has not held a serious research position in 7 years, has a long history of promoting fantastical and unsupported theories. Any data she purports to have is stolen, making it scientifically inadmissible. Furthermore, we have every reason to believe it is likely fabricated to support her own tragic delusions. This is a sad situation, but it is one we, and the proper authorities, are handling with the utmost seriousness. He had done it. In 90 seconds, he had branded her a delusional terrorist. He had used the very language of scientific validity, inadmissible data, as a weapon to suppress a truth he hadn't even seen. She was a pariah. No institution, no journal, no serious scientist on Earth would even look at her work now. She was utterly alone, with the fate of the world burning on her hard drive. She had one last call to make, one final desperate gamble. His face appeared on her screen, etched with worry. Alistair Croft looked older than he had just days ago. Evie, he breathed, his voice a mixture of relief and fear. Where are you? They're saying, the news is saying you... I know what they're saying, Alistair, she cut in, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She looked desperate, but her eyes held a new steely focus. And I don't have time to argue. I'm not going to show you what I found. I'm not going to ask you to believe in me. Alistair looked confused. Then what? I'm asking you to believe in the data, she said. Your data, the public data. Forget me, forget everything Richter is saying, and just be a scientist for 10 minutes. She shared her screen, but it wasn't her decryption model. It was the public ESON data portal, the same curated, safe information available to anyone. Look at the magnetosphere readings from Comet 67P, specifically Quadrant 7 during the perihelion pass. Now pull up the official ESON paper on solar wind interaction. Reluctantly, Alistair followed her instructions, his fingers moving over his own keyboard. All right, I have them. The official model. Evelyn pressed on, her voice like a surgeon's scalpel, attributes the amplitude of the oscillations to fluctuations in solar wind pressure. It's a clean, simple explanation, and it's wrong. Look at the harmonic decay. It's too stable. For the decay rate to be that consistent, the originating signal would need a persistent, regenerating source that the solar wind model simply cannot account for. It's a mathematical impossibility, Alistair. Unless you assume the signal has integrity. Unless you assume the comet isn't just a passive rock being hit by particles, but an active resonator, preserving a signal encoded within it. She was using his own language, the language of rigorous logic and peer-reviewed proof. She wasn't asking for a leap of faith. She was pointing out a flaw in the scripture. Alistair was silent for a long time, his eyes scanning the two data sets on his screen. He ran the numbers. He checked the published models. A slow frown creased his forehead. The decay rate, he murmured, more to himself than to her. It shouldn't be that clean. There should be more stochastic noise. He looked up at Evelyn, his expression transformed from one of worried pity to dawning, shocked comprehension. He saw the truth in the numbers. Cold, hard, undeniable mathematics. An emergency conference of the Royal Astronomical Society was an unprecedented event, convened with less than 12 hours' notice. The hall was packed, buzzing with confusion and skepticism. Alistair Croft, a titan of theoretical physics, a man whose entire career was a monument to methodical, cautious science, stood at the podium. He looked out at the sea of faces, and in the front row, he saw Klaus Richter, who was staring back at him with an expression of utter betrayal. "Good afternoon," Alistair began, his voice amplified by the microphone, steady and firm. "I have convened you all here today to make a statement, and to correct a grave error, an error of which I myself am guilty." The room fell silent. For years, I have advised my former student, Dr. Evelyn Reed, to abandon her more unconventional theories. For weeks, I have told her that her methods were wrong, a betrayal of the principles we hold dear. He paused, letting the weight of his confession settle. Today, I am here to state that while I cannot condone her methods, I can no longer deny her conclusions. I have, for the past 48 hours, reviewed the public data from the Rosetta mission, and I can tell you, with absolute certainty, that it contains anomalies our current models cannot explain. Anomalies that point to a conclusion so profound, it is my duty as a scientist and a human being to present it. He gestured to the wings. "Please listen with an open mind." Evelyn Reed walked onto the stage. She was no longer the ghost in the machine. She was pale, thin, and looked as if she hadn't slept in a year. But she stood tall, her face a mask of terror and unshakable resolve. Richter shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "This is a farce. That woman is a fugitive. This is not science." Alistair held up a hand. "She will not be presenting any stolen data, Klaus. She will be presenting an analysis of your own." Richter, stunned into silence, slowly sat back down, his face a thundercloud. Evelyn stepped up to the microphone, her heart pounding. She looked out at her peers, at the men and women who had ridiculed and exiled her, and she began to speak. She carefully, deliberately avoided the word aliens. She didn't speak of messages. Instead, she spoke of science. "I am here to propose a new model," she began, her voice gaining strength with every word. "A model of what I term interstellar data transmission via resonating magnetospheres." She put up the mathematics first, the evidence from the public data that Alistair had seen, the impossibilities of the solar wind model. Then, she showed her own model, the one unlocked by her nonlinear filter. She showed them the pattern, the language. A stunned murmur went through the crowd. Then she showed them the correlation, the mathematical key that unlocked the date of the KT extinction event. The murmur grew louder. Finally, with her hands trembling, she put the last slide on the screen. The future prediction, the threat vector, the date, 18 months from now. A deep, profound, and heavy silence fell over the hall. It was the silence of 1,000 paradigms shattering at once. Richter tried to object, stammering about procedure and protocol, but he had no ground to stand on. Evelyn had used his own institution's data to prove her case. He was defeated not by rhetoric, but by mathematics. The faces in the crowd were no longer skeptical. They were filled with a dawning, collective horror and a terrifying cosmic awe. The world had received a message, and it was a death warrant. The mystery of the singing comets was solved, but the crisis of human existence had just begun. There's a deep, primal comfort in believing the universe is orderly and predictable. When we encounter something we don't understand, like the strange song of a comet, it's reassuring to label it as beautiful but natural noise. It tames the mystery, putting the vast, silent cosmos back in a box we can understand. Our story explores what happens when that box is shattered. What makes Dr. Reed's journey so compelling is that it isn't a simple battle between science and superstition. She uses the rigorous tools of mathematics and data analysis to pursue an idea that her peers dismiss as romantic fantasy. The establishment, represented by Richter, isn't just skeptical, it's dogmatic. It refuses to even entertain a possibility that violates its tidy model of reality. This highlights a fascinating paradox. Can science itself become a kind of superstition, a rigid belief system that punishes heresy? Evelyn's obsession looks like delusion from the outside, but it's actually the very heart of the scientific method, to question everything, especially the consensus. She reminds us that every great leap forward began as an idea that sounded like madness. It leaves us with a difficult question. In our own lives, how do we tell the difference between a groundbreaking new idea and a dangerous delusion?